Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome here if you are new. I decided to do a breakfast video today, also with McDonald's, because I haven't eaten McDonald's yet and I've really been craving their breakfast, and it's one of my favorite fast food restaurants, so I don't know why I haven't done it yet. But this is the spread. I'm pretty excited about it. And I'm talking about one of my favorite kind of like, it's not really a conspiracy theory because the things happen, but like the reason as to why they happen is where the conspiracies come into play. It's called the missing 411 cases. If you've never heard of them, I definitely recommend you look them up. I will only be talking about a few of those cases today because there are hundreds upon thousands, maybe not hundreds upon thousands, but there are thousands and thousands of cases all across the US that have been documented. So I'm only going to talk about like 3 or 4. Also, I feel like they could put the butter without the hot stuff because the butter always melts, and I don't know if this butter still looks like the old butter, but they used to have like an M shaped into it, like it was the circle and then it had like the McDonald's M. I don't know if it still does that, but I also think that McDonald's hotcakes are the best pancakes. Don't at me. They've always been my favorite. Okay, so I have a caramel iced coffee, the classic egg McMuffin. It has the ham on it, and then I got a bacon McGriddle, a sausage McGriddle, a bacon egg and cheese biscuit. These are the sausage burritos, and then I also have some hash browns and some salsa for the burritos. I haven't had one of these in a minute. I used to get the frappe. So sugary, so good. I miss when they did all day breakfast because I can literally always eat a breakfast sandwich. Sorry, I forgot to show you. So good. I love the round egg that they put on here. I usually ask for that, but I didn't this time. You can see I have like the folded egg. So good. I haven't had breakfast from McDonald's so long. Okay. So the guy who started this whole missing 411 thing His name is David Paulides. I've heard people pronounce it David Paulides and also David Paulides, but I heard in an interview that he was in, they called him David Paulides, so I think that that's right. He was in the police force for 15 years and also worked alongside the FBI, and he was a detective. And he's now retired. And this whole thing came about because he went to a national park one time. I don't know if he was just there visiting and like asking questions or if it was actually because of a case. But the park rangers that he was talking to said, yeah, there's something weird going on. Like there's so many cases of like people going missing, but they're never investigated and they like won't say anything about it. And we're told not to do anything about it. So David Paulides is like, okay, so I'm just gonna like look into this because that's pretty interesting. So one thing to know about him is that there are certain criteria that these cases have to meet. It's not just like anyone going missing in a national park. Like there are certain, he doesn't, because that would just be like an unimaginable number of people who go missing. So they have to fit within this criteria to be considered a missing 411 case or for him to go and investigate. I also have notes down here because there are a few stories that I'm trying to remember and I don't want to get any of the facts wrong. So if I'm looking down there or like, I'm probably going to edit me looking down there out, but if you see me like going like this a lot, that's because I was trying to give you guys actual factual information. So the criteria that these cases have to meet is they have to happen in rural areas. There are no witnesses around to see the person actually disappear. Sometimes it's just like the person turned their head for 3 seconds and then they turned around and the missing person was gone. The hounds that they bring to come and search for the bodies, either they give them like the scent of a shoe or a piece of clothing that the person wore and the hounds refuse to search for it, or they just can't pick up a trail anywhere at all. And sometimes, if the dogs do catch on to a trail, they'll just stop somewhere randomly in the woods and just sit down, because like that's usually when you mean that it means that you found somebody, but like the trail just stops for them, so they stop searching. There are always storms within 24 hours of the disappearance, so sometimes the storms show up like within minutes, and it was something that was not forecast, which, yeah, weather is so unpredictable, so you can never know, but sometimes the storms will prevent people from searching, and they can be like just out of nowhere really crazy storms, and they happen, like I said, within up to 24 hours after the disappearance. Most of the bodies were found in swamps or briar patches, and that's if the person is dead. But if the person is found alive, they're usually only partially conscious and have like some weird retelling of the story, or they can't recollect anything from the time that they disappeared. The people who go missing are usually like super young or super old and usually have some sort of disability, whether that be like a mental disability or a physical disability, which you're like, okay, well that's kind of like, it makes sense. But like I said, these are just the criteria for David Paulides to actually put them in his missing 411 and go and investigate. So the first one is a story about an old man. He was 82 years old, and this was up in Upper New York. They went hunting. It was in November time, and this was supposed to be like this guy's last hunt. This was also, I got this from the actual David Paulides. He has like a Netflix documentary, and there are like a couple of them because all of his books are placed into regions, because there's so many that he's just like, this is like the Northwest region or this is the Eastern region. So This story actually came from that documentary. And this guy's name was Tom Messick. And he had been hunting. He's like a very well-seasoned hunter. Obviously, he's like 82. And he was missing an eye. So he was blind in one eye, obviously, because the eye wasn't there. And he also wore hearing aids. And what they did was they took all of the hunters. So there were 3 other hunters beside himself. And they all spread out at 100 feet increments, and they walked into the woods. So what they did was they put Tom in a chair because he was like super, super old and he couldn't stand. And they're like, hey, we're gonna herd all of the wildlife toward you, and you can just sit here and then you can like shoot them. So at the end of the day, all of the hunters were supposed to rendezvous back to the truck, and Tom didn't show up. And they were like, okay, well, let's go into the woods and call for him. There was no answer. So the hunters all fired warning shots, which usually if you hear a shot fired in the woods, whether that be 3 for a warning shot or you hear somebody shoot, you usually walk toward them, one, to help out, to like get whatever they caught. Like if it's a deer, you can't carry it on your own. I mean, you can, but anyway. So you go toward the shot that you hear when you're hunting, and there was like no response. So the group ended up waiting at the truck overnight because they're like, hey, maybe he'll show up, and he just got lost. Like he can't see with one eye and he has hearing aids, so maybe he just like is kind of dazed and confused in the woods. And Tom never showed up. So they went to the police, and they ended up doing like a 300-person search, and it was like arm to arm, and they laid out like the string and paths so that they could see, like they did like a grid of search, and so they knew that he wouldn't be in that area. And this was very heavily wooded, and also there was like a lot of brush. So people had to be that close, or else they could like step over a body or like walk right past it and they wouldn't see it if he did die. So one weird thing was that nothing was left behind from where Tom was sitting. So if Tom had gotten up and just walked off, he probably would have, like, if he had taken his gun, maybe he would have left the walkie-talkie, or maybe he would have left both things if he just like wanted to leave. Or if he was taken, that they probably would have just snatched him up real quick and wouldn't have taken that stuff with him. And if he did take that stuff with him, one, he's super old, so he wouldn't have made it very far. If he did die and like pass out in the woods, they would have found him within however large of an area that they searched. And then a weird thing about this was that the FBI got involved. And usually with missing cases, FBI doesn't get involved unless it's like a child or like some foul play. But foul play was not suspected in this case. So it was really strange for the FBI to show up. So once they started actually interviewing people, one of his hunting buddies was like, yeah, it was really strange. I feel like that, so the night that he went missing, and they assumed this was around the time that Tom went missing, his friend heard a weird noise in the woods that he had never heard before. So like, he's an experienced hunter and he's been out in the woods, and he's like, yeah, this was strange enough to where I can recall it and then mimic it for you because I've literally never heard this before in my life. And I thought, hey, that was weird. But the sound came from 150 feet away from where Tom was sitting, and it was like on top of a hill. And it was like a weird crackling and popping noise. This is the bacon McGriddle. So, Tom was never found. None of his remains were ever found. So, it's unsolved because there are no leads to what actually happened. Some people say it's possible that some kind of like a crevice opened up on top of the hill. Like maybe he did wander off and it just kind of like took him in and he just ended up like a sinkhole basically. And that's like one idea. And then another one is that they just didn't find the body in the search, like the arm-to-arm search that they did. So another one is that this boy, he was a like very little kid. He went out with his grandpa, not that he went out, but his grandpa and his friends, they went camping and they took his grandson with him, who was very young. They sent out a search for him like they typically would for a child, and they didn't find anything. Until 3 years later. Some hikers came across what looked like the top of a skull and a t-shirt and a tennis shoe along with the tooth. So they called the FBI, or maybe not the FBI, but they called the investigators out and they determined that it was this boy. The remains were found 500 feet up from where the boy went missing. And he was very, very young. Like, he was a toddler. So there's no way that he could have hiked 500 feet up a cliffside. And there was no blood on the shirt, which was the shirt that he was wearing the day he went missing. There was no distress to the shoe. It was almost like somebody had bought these things at the store and then placed them next to the top of this skull and this tooth, like, and just set them at the top of this cliff. There were no signs of distress, like an animal didn't take him away, and he wasn't most likely kidnapped because his clothes weren't dirty, they weren't weathered whatsoever. Like, it looked like it was pristine condition from the day that he went missing, and this was 3 years later, and all of his stuff was sitting on a cliffside. So, like, there would have been rain or like sun damage or something. And investigators, like, just don't know what happened. That was kind of like a short story, but that was just kind of like a weird one where you can make up all these excuses as to what, like, maybe, yeah, somebody did kidnap him, but then why would they return all this stuff in pristine condition? Like, the tennis shoe looked like it hadn't even been worn, and the t-shirt wasn't messed up at all, and like, why return those things? And if it was an animal, that stuff would have had some kind of like indication that an animal had drug him away. So this next one happened to a boy named Casey Hathaway, who was 3 years old, disappeared in a rural area, and then he was found 56 hours later, a quarter mile away from his house. So this is like somewhere where they actually searched for him. He was found 56 hours later, alive. Oh my gosh. So this was only like a couple hours after Casey went missing. The weather got so bad that the lead detective on the case had to pull all of the searchers out of the area, as well as the helicopters who were searching. I believe it was like the Air National Guard that was out there helping search, but they had to pull them out because the weather was so bad and it was cold. Like, this was dead of winter in North Carolina, which isn't like freezing, but it's not warm, and he was 3 years old. So when they found the boy, there was no looks of distress on him. He wasn't dirty. His clothes weren't dirty. He was like in perfect condition. And the weird thing is that he told his aunt that he had spent the last couple of days with a bear that took care of him. And you think, oh, maybe it's just this kid making up stories because he's a kid. But there have been counts of this story since the 1800s, and kids claiming that some bear-like or wolf-like creature took care of them when they went missing or kept them warm. So, do with that what you will. Also, because this was in the dead of winter, bears in North Carolina would have been in hibernation at this time. So it's very unlikely that he was huddled up next to a bear. Sure, it could have been a different animal that maybe saw him because he was young and didn't want to hurt the kid and wanted to take care of it, but I don't know, it seems pretty weird to me. Oh, this is the bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit, and I threw a hash brown on it. So there's actually a map that David Paulides has created and then published, and it's of all of the national parks, but they're almost like hotspots. So they're where most of these cases, the missing 411 cases, so disappearances that meet certain criteria, it's where they take place. And it is always in national parks. And there are some that just like, if you look on the map, it's like these giant red dots. So like the Olympic National Park, for instance, there are a ton of disappearances up there, and it's just like the entire western side of Washington is just like a big hotspot for all of these disappearances. So one thing about David Paulides is that he is like a big conspiracy theorist, but it's not that he's doing these investigations to try to prove his point of like, oh, well, it was aliens or it was Sasquatch. Yes, he's a believer in Sasquatch. No, I wouldn't say he's a believer in Sasquatch, but he has done he's written books on interviews that he's done with people who believe they have seen Sasquatch or something of that sort. So, and then he goes out and he tries to find the place and not debunk it, but it's almost like a Ghostbusters type thing to where he'll be like, hey, this is what happened and this is where it happened. And the people go with him and he does like some sort of an investigation. So it's more like journalism. So that is one thing to take with a grain of salt with David Paulides. He doesn't make any claims to what he thinks may have happened or might be happening in these cases, but it's kind of like with all of the facts that are presented, you just kind of assume that's where he's going. But mostly I think he's trying to say that the cases hint to like some kind of something that we don't know about that's been preying on humans or has been like abducting humans or maybe caring for them in some cases, like the boy that disappeared in North Carolina. But it's just kind of like bringing light to these unanswered, unsolved mysteries and being like, hey, this is definitely a possibility, and maybe we should just be a little more careful when we go out into the woods by ourselves. You know. That is all I have for you today. I am so full, and it was very good. So if you liked this video, please like and subscribe. Maybe check out some of the other videos that I made. I usually tell some kind of a story. Sometimes I have a story planned, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm just there to vent. Please go check it out if you're interested, and I will see you next time. Okay, thanks. Bye. Are you pouting because you couldn't make noise while I'm filming?